France, a shining pearl of Europe in the 18th century. The culture of this country captured the minds of many, including the Empress Catherine II. However, if examining the France of 1789, we see a very different picture. The streets of Paris are filled not with sunlight, but with thick black smoke. Instead of flower beds, there are piles of garbage and ruins everywhere, while the majestic and refined French nobility is hiding in the doorways from the angry crowds. Fear, hunger, and bloody madness gripping France. Now it is a threat to Europe, like a cancer that can poison the entire body. What could plunge such a great country into chaos, and who started the events that would become one of the most significant moments in recent history? In today's issue of Infographics, we'll not just talk about the Great French Revolution, but also consider a version in which the Illuminati participated in this historical event. Even prior to the fateful year of 1789, irreparable processes of destruction started to appear in the country. Like most major world events, the French Revolution began with a financial issue. Endless conflicts with England drained the country's resources, but it was not enough for King Louis XVI. He hatched a new plan to poison the lives of the Englishmen. In 1778, France officially supported America in the War of Independence against England. That's when all the country's money literally disappeared. He didn't want to live in poverty, thus Louis XVI raised taxes on the peasants. The poor people couldn't afford the increase, and then the first riots arose. The king was unpleasantly surprised by this reaction and decided to burden the nobility with taxes as well. It's not difficult to guess that this also led to outrage. The nobility rebelled defiantly. On May 5, 1789, a meeting of the States General was convened, which everyone had already forgotten about. The highest estate representative institution had operated in the country since the 14th century. This time, it was attended by representatives of all three estates, but the deputies from the third estate turned out to be almost twice as many as all the others combined. However, the numerical advantage didn't play any role. Proposals to distribute taxes evenly and give legal freedom to the third estate were rejected. After that, the deputies of the poor strata of the population did not grieve for long and gathered separately. So the National Assembly appeared. Its ideas were simple: to end the suffocating power of the monarchy and create a constitution for France. Every day, there were more and more supporters of this revolutionary movement. Very soon, the residents of Paris who were not involved in this action felt something was wrong as they began to bring forward troops to the capital. This news quickly reached the revolutionaries, and then a fatal decision was made. On July 14, 1789, a crowd of armed rebels moved towards the city's prison fortress, Bastille. It should be noted that in Paris at that time, the king was not the only one who ruled. There were nobles in the city who could influence the fate of the people using the invisible hand of the puppeteer. These are the so-called Philateles, representatives of the Masonic Lodge United Friends. The secret organization of the Freemasons can be compared to modern spy networks. Power was concentrated in their hands, and top officials from many countries protected them from trouble. But in addition to the Freemasons, another secret organization appeared in France whose influence and strength prevailed. In 1787, a mysterious stranger arrives in Paris, witnessing the city already engulfed in the fire of the rebellion. This person would do whatever necessary to achieve their goal. So far, he's a stranger in the city, but he knows who to turn to for help. The alleged leader of the Illuminati order, Johann Bode, is on his way to meet with representatives of the Freemasons. To this day, many consider the Illuminati and the Freemasons to be one organization, but this is not correct. The Masons had an invisible hand that rules from the shadows and revels in power, while the Illuminati had a clear position: to eliminate the monarchies around the world and transfer power to the people. Both of them acted as covertly as possible, but their goals were different. The Illuminati were disgusted with the authorities, but for the sake of achieving their goals, they were included in the closest circle of the rulers. After long negotiations, Bode, better known as a translator of German literature, succeeded in gaining the confidence of the leader of the Parisian Masonic lodges, Savvalet de Lange. After Bode's arrival in Paris, the United Friends Masonic Lodge began to undergo an irreversible metamorphosis. A year before the Revolution, a branch was formed within the lodge, which clearly demonstrated the influence of the Illuminati. Bode carried out his plan. The ideas of the revolution began to spread among the citizens of Paris and some areas beyond its borders. The people began to riot. On July 14, 1789, the revolutionaries marched to the Bastille fortress to seize the prison's arsenal. For many, this campaign was only a symbol of the revolution. They did not know that they were being directed by other forces. Black smoke rose from the mighty fortress. The Bastille was ablaze. The defenders of the fortress opened fire, but this was not enough. The prison was taken over by the revolutionaries. Louis XVI, very gentle and not militant by nature, made concessions to the revolutionaries, accepting their demands. From the 5th of August, the peasants were freed from the stranglehold of power, and the privileges of the upper classes were abolished. On August 26, the first declaration on the rights of a French citizen was adopted. The absolute monarchy had fallen. In light of political terms, this looked like a harmless agreement, but in reality, it was a nightmare. The peasants, who were enduring the oppression of the upper classes, finally got rid of their shackles, both physical and moral. Instead of tools, they took up arms, and a mad slaughter began. The houses of the nobles and some high-ranking military personnel were set ablaze. Members of the clergy and aristocracy, along with their families, were taken out into the street, where they were mocked before being publicly executed. Complete anarchy, devastation, and famine ensued. The shadow of the revolution instantly spread beyond Paris, covering the entire country. Members of the Order of the Illuminati achieved their goal, and dissenting representatives of the Freemasons were forced to flee the country. From now on, the king was only an official who obeyed the new government. Now France had become a threat to all of Europe, and even to the Russian Empire. The world powers were afraid of this wave of revolution, and so the anti-French coalition was created. It consisted of England, Prussia, the Holy Roman Empire, Austria, the Russian Empire, Portugal, and several other countries. Upon learning of this, the new French government decided to go to war with Austria and Prussia in order to eliminate the main and closest threats. However, their ambition would be their downfall. France, torn by the revolution, became vulnerable, and its troops were losing. In 1793, the royal family tried to leave the country, which the revolutionaries took advantage of. The new government blamed all the troubles on the king. Louis XVI and his family were arrested and imprisoned. On January 20, they were charged with treason against the state and their people. On the morning of January 21, 1793, a huge crowd gathered in the streets of Paris, through which the king was paraded for several hours prior to his own execution. However, many citizens attempted to reach his carriage and persuade the guards to cancel the execution. There were also those who tried to prevent the execution by force. One of the supporters of Louis XVI, the politician Jean-Pierre Devasse, was leading a crowd of supporters directly to the carriage. He wanted to recapture the king and save him, but the forces were feeble. All the attackers were immediately killed in front of the crowd, but Batz miraculously managed to escape. When he ascended the scaffold, the cowardly and mild-mannered king suddenly surprised everyone. He spoke firmly and emphatically of his innocence. Louis tried to make a speech about the dark future that awaits France, but he was muffled by the drum roll. At 10:22, Louis XVI was beheaded on the guillotine. The head, contrary to the rules of execution, was taken out of the basket and shown to the people in the square. No one knows how it really transpired, but according to legend, the people rejoiced. Looking at the accusations and the execution of the king, one can easily suspect the influence of the Illuminati upon the event. By this time, the king no longer had power, but could pose a great danger if he managed to escape. Despite the precautions taken and their extensive network of connections, the royal family was tracked down. Those responsible acted clearly and smoothly, using information from secret sources. It seemed that peace and harmony should have come with the destruction of the monarch, but this did not happen. Power blinds people, even those who sought full equality. After the king's execution, Paris and all of France began to be torn apart by internal conflicts. The new government, the National Convention, split into several warring factions. Among them were the Girondins, who were opposed to the extreme cruelty and execution of the king. And then there were the Montagnards, who welcomed drastic measures. They sensed weakness in the Girondins and denounced them as traitors, putting most of them under arrest. On October 31, 1793, the mass execution of the Girondins began on the initiative of the Revolutionary Tribunal. The new government was destroying itself from within, and the new constitution, which had taken so long to reach, had not yet been adopted. In 1794, the rules of the Revolutionary Tribunal were tightened, and the perpetrators were immediately executed without interrogation or trial. The members of the convention, who were not Montagnards, began to fear for their lives. Another rearrangement of forces occurred July 27, 1794, when the leaders of the Montagnards were arrested by other members of the convention and later executed by guillotine. After this coup, the internal chaos stopped and the convention was once again able to focus on establishing a better power. In August 1795, the National Convention adopted a new constitution. Legislative power goes to the legislative body and executive power goes to the Directory. It was the representatives of the Directory who tried their best to stabilize the situation in long-suffering France. On September 4, 1797, the Directory enlisted the support of a promising young general, and the authorities personally met with a short, incredibly talented military man. It was Napoleon Bonaparte. A military regime was declared in the country. Riots of citizens and militias were suppressed. Bonaparte, as expected, did his job, but the general was considered an excellent strategist for a reason. November 9, 1799, the Parliament, represented by the Council of Elders and the Council of 500, was concerned about the resignation of 3 out of 5 members of the Directory. The council met at the Château St. Cloud, but instead of the retired members of the Directory, Napoleon Bonaparte arrived. He wanted to carry through the resignation of the government and the creation of a new constitution, but his conditions were rejected. It was then that Napoleon decided to act by force. With the drums beating, the government building was captured. On that day, the Great French Revolution ended. Later, Napoleon Bonaparte would take power into his own hands and declare himself emperor. It's difficult to say whether the Illuminati were involved in the events of the French Revolution. There are many conflicting theories, but the influence of the Illuminati on the outcome of the revolution appears quite real. What do you think about the conspiracy theory? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Like and share this video with your friends.